The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was standing outside a church one morning and noticed how people were coming out of the church after having celebrated within the church the resurrection of their Lord. But even as they came out, he noticed that their faces were downcast. They were looking morose and sad. Each was going about his or her own business as if they had never experienced anything in the church. So after looking at this scene, he shouted at the top of his voice, "If you are a resurrected people, why don't you look it? Why don't you act it? Why does the resurrection that you profess not show in your person? Why does it not show on your face? Why does it not show as you walk out of the church?" I think this question needs to be answered. And in order to find an answer, we need to ask ourselves, what is it which prevents us from being the resurrected people that we are called to be? And only one answer comes to mind, and that is fear. The larger majority of us, if not all of us, are afraid of something, of someone, or of some event. This fear prevents us from being who we are. It prevents us from being the kind of persons that we are meant to be. And the irony is that fear is unreal. That fear is an illusion. That fear is not a positive. Just as darkness is the absence of light, and just as sickness is the absence of health, so fear is the absence of love. Many people think that the opposite of love is hate. No. The opposite of love is fear. 1 John 4:18 puts it very beautifully when John says in that verse, there is no fear in love. Fear and love are opposites. So there is no fear in love. For perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment. And the one who fears is not perfected in love. So if there is love, there is no fear. And where there is fear, there cannot be love. So the question is, where does this fear which John speaks about come from? Does it come from something which is outside of me and that frightens me? Does it come from something which is within me? Or does it come from my perception, the way I look at things? And I believe that James, in his letter, gives us a direction along which we can look. In chapter 4, verse 3, James says, you want something and you cannot have it. And so you wage war. You desire something and cannot obtain obtain it, and so you are willing to kill. In other words, it is our cravings, our wantings, our longings, our desires which are at the root of fear. If I believe that there is someone who is holding something that I think I cannot do without, then I am willing to pander to that person. I am willing to bow down to that person. I am willing to do whatever that person wishes, including demeaning myself, if only I could get what I think I cannot be happy without. In other words, my desires allow me to be controlled by others, and my desires make me frightened of those who hold them in their hands. Some years ago, scientists conducted an experiment in which they built a cage divided into two parts. The division was made by a wire through which an electric current was passed. They took a rat and put the rat on one side of the cage, feeding the rats pellets of food. The rat was quite content to stay in its corner. But after some time, the rat felt hungry. But the scientists placed pellets of food now on the other side of the cage. So the rat began to move after sensing that there was food on the other side. And as it came to the center of the cage, it got a shock and it went back to its corner. The second time the rat went to the food, it got a shock and went back to its corner again. A couple of hours later, the rat began to feel hungry and went again to the center of the cage in order to go for the food on the other side. It got a shock, went back to its corner and died of starvation. They took that rat out and tried another experiment with another rat. But this time, instead of food, they fed the rat with drugs. The rat was now dependent on drugs. The scientists let the rat be in its corner, and as long as the rat was fed with the drug, the rat was quite content to stay in its corner. But once the effect of the drug died out, the scientists placed drugs now on the other side. And this rat could sense that there was a drug on the other side. So it went tentatively to go for the drug on the other side. It got a shock and went back to its corner. Unlike the earlier one, kept on going to the center of the cage to reach the other side until it was electrocuted on the wire. The first rat preferred to stay away after the third attempt. This rat would not give up because it had become so dependent on the drug. It could not do without the drug. It was made to believe that its existence depended on the getting of the drug. The drug moved this rat. The drug made the rat feel that it could only be content and happy if it had the drug. And you might wonder what this story has to do with you. Because you and I are also possibly dependent on a variety of drugs. It could be something psychological, like the drug of approval, like the drug of applause, like the drug of being well thought of, like the drug of your good name. Or it could be material, like a new computer, a new phone, a new home, a new car. Something that is material which you believe, unfortunately, that you cannot do without. That is your drug. So if you are convinced that you can only be happy if you get that new car, or you can only be happy if you get that new home, or you cannot be happy without a car or a vehicle, then that has become your drug. And so, like the rat in the story, you will possibly do whatever it takes to get that drug. And after you have got it, there is yet another drug, and another drug, and another drug, and the story never ends. And so the question is it possible for me to get rid of this drug addiction? Is it possible for me to reach a stage where I really am not moved by whether I get or do not get something? And the answer is, it is possible. And what is even better is that the answer is available in the scriptures. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 to 13, Paul gives us the key to happiness. Paul tells us how to deal with our desires. Paul tells us that we do not have to be dependent on drugs. And this is what Paul says in these verses. I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. So contentment is not dependent on my getting or not getting something. Contentment is not dependent on my acquiring something or not acquiring it. Contentment is dependent on my state of mind. Contentment is decided when I decide in advance that whether I acquire what I am striving for or whether for some reason I do not acquire it, I can be content. And this is the secret of getting rid of my drug addiction, namely, at every stage of my life, I have choices. Let me give you my own example. When I say that my first choice is that I pray that every single person making this retreat must be transformed and become a new person after the retreat. But I have a second choice. And the second choice is that half of those making the retreat must be transformed. But I also have a third choice. And the third choice is that a quarter of those making the retreat must be transformed. And I have a fourth choice, that is 15% must be transformed. And a fifth choice, which is 10% must be transformed. And finally, I have a choice which says that no one must be transformed except I. Because I'm giving these talks so often that at least I hope that I can transform myself. In other words, therefore, I do not need to be disappointed. I do not need to be dejected. I do not need to be frustrated if my first desire is not received. I have a variety of choices. I have so many. And the more choices I have, the happier I will be. The more choices I have, the less are the chances of me being frustrated and frightened. I'm going to give you an exercise which I would like you to do whenever you feel angry or upset or frustrated or anxious or revengeful. No matter what these emotions are, because they are only symptoms of fear, you can try this 3-step exercise. And the first step is, my husband made me angry, or my wife made me angry, or my parents made me angry, or my children made me angry, or my boss upset me, my superior made me angry. That's often the first step. And many of us stay at that first step, and we develop this resentment in our heart. We develop this anxiety in our heart. We develop this hate in our heart, and it eats into us. So, the second step, I ask you, was it your husband who made you angry? Or was it the action of your husband? Or what your husband said? Was it your wife who made you angry? Or what your wife said or what your wife did? Was it your boss who made you angry? Or the fact that your boss did not give you the raise you expected? Your boss did not give you that good report which you thought he or she ought to give you? Was it your parents who made you angry? Or was it because they said, come on now, it's time to study, you wasted too much of time on the internet or on WhatsApp? You realize that if you move from the person to this second step, you have already moved a long way, because now you are angry not with the person, but with the person's words, or the person's actions, or the person's non-action. And I believe that that is a great movement already. And now, if you can make the jump to the third step, I believe that you can be free. And the third step is, was it the words of the person? Was it the action of your husband or wife? Or was it the manner in which you responded? Was it the manner in which you reacted? Was it the manner in which you heard those words or saw that action? And so, if you can change your reaction, if you can change your response, if you can change the manner in which you hear those words or in which you see that action, then the anger disappears. The frustration disappears. I do not mean that you accept the person's action. No. I do not mean that you accept the person's words. No. You can tell the person about the action or the words, but you will tell it without being angry. And your telling then becomes not only more effective, it becomes more efficacious. In summary, therefore, my boss made me angry. The second step, it was not my boss who made me angry, but the fact that he did not give me a good report. Third, it was not that my boss did not give me a good report, it was my response, my reaction to the report of my boss that made me angry. I can clarify with my boss surely why he or she wrote such a report. I can ask questions of my boss about why this kind of report was written about me. I am within my rights to do such a thing. But I don't need to do it with anger. I don't need to do it with frustration. I don't need to do it by getting upset. And so once again, I direct you to Philippians 4, verses 11 to 13. And I ask you to keep assimilating these words of Paul. I have learned, in whatever situation I am, to be content. If you can learn this today, you will always and every day be happy, which is what God wants you to be.